A lot of nonprofits start when something happens. Some circumstance that impacted you or a family member, or maybe there was a frustration and you just needed to get around it. And you said, if I started an organization for social good that addressed this, that would be really cool. And a lot of people start nonprofits. But, there's another way. We're going to talk about that today. Today, I have Linda Rentschler of Humanitarian Social Innovations. And Linda is going to talk about an alternative to starting nonprofits, and that's called fiscal sponsorships. I'll let her explain more. And just to remind you, this video is brought to you by Nonprofit Career Network, which is a division of Great Careers Groups. And check them out. You'll see the link in the descriptions. All right. Thanks a lot, and let's get started. We are happy today to have Linda Rentschler. And Linda is Executive Director and founder of Humanitarian Social Innovations. And this is, we were just talking ahead of coming on here, that I really think this is a cool topic, but maybe I'm just a geek about things. That Humanitarian Social Innovations is what's called a fiscal sponsor. And we're going to learn all about fiscal sponsors in the time to come here. But first, let me introduce Linda. First of all, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Linda, I'm just going to read right off her bio here, is, like I said, the executive director. In 2014, she and the founding team incorporated HSI to equip and serve people who wanted to begin charitable programs that would raise the quality of life for the people around them. And that's key to what we're going to be talking about. She has a bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College. It's in biology. She has a master's in educational leadership and business administration from Lehigh University. I hope you don't mind me telling folks that you are a veteran of the United States Army. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Linda enjoys outdoors and many kinds of music, and she highly values her faith and family and spends much of her free time with her children and grandchildren. And I'm sure you'll agree that the best thing about grandchildren is you give them back.
Absolutely.
I love my grandchildren, but let's, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, that pretty much sums it up.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for being with us. I'm really interested in hearing about what you have to say about things. So let's just start right off here. What is a fiscal sponsor?
So a fiscal sponsor is a tax-exempt organization with a charitable mission, and they receive charitable funds, contributions for specific projects under their umbrella.
Okay. So we're going to dig a little bit more into that specific project thing in a second. But now, why and how did you found Humanitarian Social Innovations? What was like the thing?
Well, so it really just kind of came about in a very natural way. In 2014, I was still working as an administrator at a faith-based school, and two former students, Paul and Mike, they came back after having been through college, and they had an idea for a charitable program, a nonprofit they wanted to start, but they found that it was difficult and expensive to start a nonprofit. Yeah. And they came to me for some help, and I agreed to kind of advise and support them and help them get started. And so we had a visit with a lawyer, and I distinctly remember this ride coming back home after that lawyer's visit, having dropped a lot of money and had very little assistance. And I remember our conversation. We thought there has got to be a better way for people who just want to help people, right? And so we started Humanitarian Social Innovations, and I looked that summer for a business model that would work for us to do what we envisioned for people who wanted to do these good things. And I came upon the concept of fiscal sponsorship, and I spent some time reading Gregory Colvin's book, which is the Bible of fiscal sponsorship. And it's called 6 Ways to Do It Right. And when I read that book, I realized that this was the business model that was going to enable us to fulfill that vision that we had for that purpose.
So up to that point, you didn't know about fiscal sponsors. Is that right?
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
We just knew the end result of what we wanted to do.
Right.
Right. And we just weren't really quite sure about which business model was best to do that. And fiscal sponsorship, it was the light bulb, right?
Well, that's cool. That's really neat. So why haven't I heard more about this? Why were you in the dark and I was telling you how I discovered it, just kind of by accident? What's that all about?
Well, fiscal sponsorship as a business model has grown as the nonprofit sector has grown. So it's not always been there in the same construct that it is now. Right. But it's an innovative business model that applies in a very conventional and established sector. And the people who need to embrace it are very traditional philanthropic organizations and individuals. And so there's this kind of a disconnect between the innovative style of the fiscal sponsor and the traditional, this is how we've always done it, of the sector and its supporters. And so the onus is on the fiscal sponsor to communicate and inspire the rest of the sector to see the positive of what we do, to understand it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's because there's so many advantages of this model. I tell a lot of folks who come to me and say, gee, I want to start a nonprofit for, it's like, yeah, okay, full stop. I mean, if they want to do it, God bless them, go do. It's not an issue, right? But they need to consider this other model as well as, being independent that way.
Right. And Boulay said in one of his columns, he said, as soon as you say, I want to start a nonprofit, everybody comes out with their torches and pitchforks, right? And so that's kind of what you face as a fiscal sponsor. They say, well, we don't need more nonprofits. Well, no, that's not what we're doing. We're not incubating them and spitting them out. We're actually consolidating the overhead and giving space for those ideas to be tested as to whether they would be a viable nonprofit or not. And so it really makes the sector more healthy to have an organization like this around.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A few years ago, and I can't point my finger at exactly when, the IRS did one of those kind of, a lot of folks considered it like a bloodletting, right? Where they said, okay, all these nonprofits we haven't heard from for a while, we're just going to take them off the books, right? And I don't know, it actually, I think, went under $1 million nonprofits for a little bit, but then it just ratcheted right back up. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is a valuable service even in that. Not to say, and let me clarify that, it's not that I don't think that there are too many nonprofits, just like there aren't too many businesses. But I think this is a great way of organizing it.
Well, sure. I mean, people start nonprofits because they're very passionate about something, or because something terrible happened to them and they want to make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else, but they are not really always equipped to run a corporation, which is what a nonprofit is. And so the fiscal sponsor helps to bridge that. It allows people to do the things they're passionate about, or to access their healing through the good works without having to create a whole infrastructure that they're really maybe not capable of managing. And then that just complicates the whole sector.
Yeah. Now, and that's actually a very good point. And I've had people, when I've said fiscal sponsor, and they first grab the word, they think, oh, I need to go to my local church and I can be under their wing. I guess that's possible, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that would be a like fiscal sponsor light, you might say.
Yeah. So what we've found with organizations that come to us from the faith-based sector, the churches and
And that was
synagogues
just
and
an
so on.
example, but yeah, sure.
No, but it's true because people in the congregation will want to do something great. And they'll say to their religious leader, hey, I think we should do this ministry, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Which
right.
is fine, but maybe the church isn't really equipped to do that just because somebody's passionate about it. And so it's nice for that religious leader to have some place to send them outside of outside the congregation. Hey, yeah, start that up, but over here, we just can't do that within the construct of our church. Right?
Actually, that's a very good point. I had not considered that you would pick up those kinds of things, but I could see where that'd be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So, so you've said that fiscal sponsors are nonprofits, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
are they, is there any subclassification beyond that? Or you're just, I mean, it's not like, I know foundations are a subclass of a C3. Are fiscal sponsors that way, or is it just like a standard C3?
All of the fiscal sponsorships that I'm aware of are C3 organizations. So
Right.
we're all incorporated in the traditional way, and we're all certified in the same way by the IRS.
Right.
But that's about pretty much where a lot of the similarities end. There really is quite a variance between the individual fiscal sponsors.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, so first of all, so you're not like C6s or anything like that, right? You're all C3s. But now, when you say they vary, what kind of things do you mean?
Well, they'll a lot of times they'll vary by their mission. That's probably the primary variation is their mission. They vary by the models of fiscal sponsorship that they offer. There are a couple of different ways to do it. And so they vary by how they do it, what additional services they give, maybe a little bit by their philosophical lean. Do they lean right? Do they lean left politically? There are very many ways that we differ. Some do international sponsorships, some don't. Some are geographically concentrated.
Okay.
Some not. So there's quite a bit of variation.
No, that's interesting, and I could see. I mean, just like the nonprofit community, there's a wide variation, and even within the subsector, there would be.
Sure.
So, how many organizations does HSI have?
So we have 48 programs under our umbrella.
All right.
The largest fiscal sponsor has right around 4,000, and that's Fractured Atlas in New York City.
I've heard of them, yes.
Yeah, they're an arts and culture organization, but about 2/3, about 200 fiscal sponsors are 20 projects or less. So most of the fiscal sponsors are on the smaller side.
Okay, right. And so you're kind of a mid-size, and wanting to grow kind of
Yes.
organization that way. Sure.
Yeah, sure.
So what kind of criteria do you have? What's your sub niche there?
Yes, so all of our programs demonstrate a benefit to humanity, and they have to demonstrate that within the application process, and they have to align with that. That's our mission, is to create a benefit for humanity, and they must align with that mission before we'll consider them for fiscal sponsorship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but that's pretty broad. I mean, it's not. I would think any typical person who wants to start a nonprofit and might consider this might qualify, even when they're saving animals, right?
Yeah, it's broad by design. It really is. It's broad by design. We do have a few animal programs. But so the one I'm thinking of right off the top of my head is Search and Recovery Canines. Mm-hmm. It's an organization that has cadaver dogs. They search for bodies.
Ooh, okay.
And that brings people closure, right? If they've lost a loved one somewhere, they've drowned, they can't find the body, or they're lost in the woods, then that helps by bringing closure. And so you're right in that there's usually a way to bring it around. as a
Mhm.
benefit to humanity, but not always. You'll be surprised what we get. So,
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay. I won't let you, I won't ask you to out any organization.
no, we're not going to go down that path today, but we could write a book. So,
I'm sure. I'm sure. Uh, so interestingly different by mission and all that. What would your pitch be to say, hey, look at us or fiscal sponsorship generally, as opposed to starting your own nonprofit?
well, I think, there really is not a lot of competition between fiscal sponsors. Actually, sometimes we refer programs to other sponsors that we think would be a better fit. So there really is this kind of congeniality within the sector, which is really nice. So as far as trying to show our value over another fiscal sponsor, we don't really do that. However, the biggest value that we have to an incoming program is our 501c3 status, our tax exempt status. That is the value proposition. That's what people want when they're looking for us. They need money, they need to raise funds, and they don't always have that. So a lot of times it's a startup organization.
Mhm.
They need access to tax exempt funds in their startup process, and they haven't already had their 501c3. So they come underneath a fiscal sponsor. A lot of times it's somebody who doesn't necessarily want to run an entire nonprofit,
Right.
but they want to do a good program. They just want to focus on the mission. And so we do all the overhead in the back office for them. We've operated as a collective impact backbone organization, which is really interesting and fun. It's one of my favorite things to do.
So what's that mean? What would collective impact backbone?
So collective impact is a collective impact group is a group of nonprofits who are all focused on one problem. So for example, human trafficking.
Sure.
If you have a dozen nonprofits in the area, in the region that are focused on that, they can come together in a collective group to address certain impact areas together.
Like coordinate services, things like that.
Correct. And so the problem with that is that if the collective project is getting a grant, which nonprofit in the group accepts the grant? And if they do, it artificially inflates their revenue, and it could make them unavailable for a grant from that same grantor.
Now you're addressing something else too, which I have seen, and you talked about the best part of that, I will say. But the part I find is that I used to see this between universities and grants, where one university would be the primary and the other university would come along, and the primary always was in control because they controlled the money.
Right.
And the other ones felt secondary, and there was kind of an interpersonal resentment kind of between them that way. And what you're doing is, like, I've always thought that not in the business sector, we have LLCs, right? Mm-hmm. So two businesses come together and they say, well, we want to do a project together. And so they form an LLC between them, and they're integrated and they can do this thing. We don't have that in the nonprofit sector. And so effectively you're filling that niche.
Correct.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's one of my favorite things to do. It just makes so much sense for the fiscal sponsor to act in that capacity. Because we have all the ability to keep the funds separate, to allocate funds, and so it really does make sense for us to do that.
Well, the other thing too, you said it kind of sparked a synapse, was that there are a lot of people, I mean, let's just be honest, and I think folks would stand back and be honest with themselves about this. They're just not good about the organization part in terms of the bookkeeping and all the structure stuff. And this is a tremendous service to lift that out so they can focus on effectively the mission and what's fun for them to do, what they're good at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and consolidating that overhead of small programs is definitely a huge selling point for the
Hmm.
concept of fiscal sponsorship, not only for the programs, but also for the funders. I mean, we can do all of that on about 10%, which is a terrific overhead statistic.
Oh yeah.
And then and the other good thing about that is it's efficient for board development. I mean, you mentioned in our time before this recording that the organization didn't have a board, and that sparked the conversation about fiscal sponsorship.
Right.
But think about if 48 little organizations each had to have their own board of directors, that really draws down the pool of available volunteers, right?
Yeah.
But if they come under the fiscal sponsors board of directors, that's so much more efficient. And then we have that one small group we can focus our capacity building training, board training on, instead of spread out over 48 times maybe 9 or 15 and that many people. So it just is it's a good use of resources, including human resources.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, to
Yeah.
have an accounting staff, for example, that is able to handle that, as opposed to having 48 accounting staffs
Sure.
and actually, and I could also see where that could be prevent some fraud potential and things where, I mean, it happens where a small nonprofit gets in a situation where they trust somebody who may not be qualified or, I mean, a lot of stuff behind that. And we read about it in the paper that somebody's taken money. Well, I would expect that your standards are different. They're higher because you do work with people who are getting a real salary that way.
Yeah, and that's one of the nice things that we can take off the plate of those small programs, and even established nonprofits. We contract out those services. Maybe somebody has created a nonprofit and they've overcreated, right? And they've got this structure now that they can't manage because it was maybe a trendy mission. They got huge grants and now they can't manage it. So we contract out those services to them as well. We help them, kind of pull them in under the fold and help them so they can accomplish that mission, which is valuable and viable. The funding is there. It's just, oh my word, this all happened so fast. I don't have anyone on my staff who can manage this. And so they come to the fiscal sponsor for that.
That's interesting. Fascinating. So do you bring together your program people for training or for opportunities to connect with each other?
We did pre-COVID. We met together quarterly pre-COVID. And then once the COVID shutdown occurred, we started monthly Zoom meetings just to kind of check in and see how everyone was doing. Because it was, of course, quite a shock to the sector. And some of our programs did have to close down because their missions were severely compromised. But others acclimated, pivoted, and some just flourished because that was that crisis, that because of the crisis, their mission was needed more.
Yeah, we saw that all across the sector. The theaters, for example, would suffer, but the shelters or some other organization, would, So, so that's good. So there's an opportunity to network, connect, to find other resources within your, say, 48 or whatever, number you have. What two things hit my head here, and both about money. So how do you, as a program, fund yourself beyond, do they raise their money separately? Do you offer help that way? How's that work?
Yes. So each program raises their own funds.
Okay.
We support them in that by giving them access to an online fundraising platform. As soon as they're one of our programs, they get an online presence, so they can immediately start raising funds online. So that's very helpful, especially to the very small programs.
Oh yeah.
And then as far as once they're grant ready, meaning they have a well outlined program and they've demonstrated that all the things that are necessary to be grant ready, we give them access to programs that help them find grants. And I call it thought partnership in the grant. So we don't write the grants. If we
Sure.
did, we would be writing grants all day long, every day.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody needs money, right?
Yeah, right.
But we give them the resources they need to find the grants, and then we thought partner with them as they submit the drafts and so on, and give them the documentation that they need from us as their fiscal sponsor.
Sure.
And so in that way, we support the process without actually conducting it ourselves.
Yeah, no, I could see where that'd be really valuable,
Yeah.
effectively holding their hand through the process, at least in the beginning.
Sure.
I teach a grant writing class, and I see so many folks who are in it in the beginning, and they have the skills.
Mm-hmm.
They just need somebody to stand with them for a little bit to get those first couple out. So
Sure.
That's really cool. So then, so they're raising their own money. That's great. But obviously, and I don't know, does your organization raise its own money as well?
Yes. So we do raise, we call it the headquarters organization. So
Okay.
we do raise some funds for the headquarters organization, although what we do is really not that sexy to funders, right? So we pretty much sit behind our computers and do the office work. It's a little bit hard to get funding for overhead.
Yeah.
However, we do have some partner organizations locally who believe in what we're doing as an organization and would like to see this model grow. And so they are investing in what we're doing. And we have some generous donors as well who've caught the vision for what HSI as an organization, as a fiscal sponsor, can do. But we really, we do well when our programs do well. Our revenue model, and for 96% of fiscal sponsors, the revenue
my next
model
question, right?
is taking a percentage of funds raised. So if I can help a program grow and raise funds, I'm helping them, and and then as a side note, we as an organization, as a general fund, we're assisted as well. And those funds are kept restricted for that program, minus the administrative fee that we take to keep the lights on and keep the overhead going.
Yeah, of course. Now, I also, I think a pitch would be to say that the more you do, the better you do with your own headquarters fundraising, actually keeps the program costs down for each individual program, because you're able to not charge them so much, maybe, if you do well that way.
Yeah, sure.
So that's good. So that's kind of a win-win. That's really cool.
It is.
So it sounds like you work with startups, yes, but more than startups.
Yes.
Which is not something I would have expected. That's fascinating. Has any nonprofit come to you that's established and say, listen, we want to put aside our status and just become part of you? Does that happen?
It does, not as often as I hope it would, but we do have that occurring, and they can put aside their 501c3 and raise funds under our organization, essentially becoming a grantee of our organization. We're also a good place to consolidate nonprofit organizations where they set aside their statuses, create a new nonprofit entity under a fiscal sponsor, and they sit there. That's their safety net while they work out all the details. They can spin out if they want to. They can stay there if they want to, but they have a structure over them that kind of protects them while they're working all of that out. So that's a good use of a fiscal sponsor. And then another thing that we saw as a result of COVID was perhaps the nonprofit organization itself cannot survive the current economic climate. However, there's a program in that organization that cannot die. That program needs to stay viable and funded. We can pull that program out, and then the original parent organization can dissolve gradually, right, as it needs to. It can take its time and dissolve while we pulled out that essential program and put it underneath the fiscal sponsor.
Well, that's fascinating. So you would be able to help in merger situations and in closure situations, which
Sure.
I would not have guessed that. That's really that's cool. But it makes a lot of sense.
It's a really it's a business model that is very innovative in a lot of different ways. And depending on the needs of the sector, the business model is strong yet flexible, which is really, really nice for this sector.
Yeah, no, I could see that. So, so do you work at this HSI? I mean, you're in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, in case anybody, if they've ever heard the song Allentown,
Yes.
Billy Joel, that's you guys.
We're right next door. We're in the shadow of Lehigh University, the Star of Bethlehem. So
There you go. So, but your programs, I mean, I imagine a lot of them come from Lehigh Valley, but they're also outside, correct?
yes, so we're not a geographically restricted fiscal sponsor. We accept programs from other regions of Pennsylvania, for other states. And we also have a small group of international programs.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's now, right, because you would be their C3 here in the States.
Correct.
For them,
Right.
for over there. Okay.
Yeah.
Going over the things, I mean, tell me, is there anything, we talked about a lot of stuff here, and is there more I should be asking? This is really cool.
Let me see. Well, I guess we could talk about, spin out.
Oh, yeah.
What happens at the end of fiscal sponsorship, or does it have to end?
Right.
And we always tell organizations they can stay as long as they want to. For the most part, I mean, of course, there are those ones we'll put in the book later on, but but the nice thing about fiscal sponsorship, another nice thing about it, is that it's a testing ground, a proving ground for concepts, for charitable concepts. So maybe somebody has an idea that they think should be a nonprofit organization. So they bring it under the fiscal sponsor, and they try to develop a donor base, a grant portfolio, a fundraising plan. They run their programs. They see if there are opportunities to collaborate with other nonprofits. And sometimes that works and the organization grows. And sometimes it doesn't work. And the program manager says, I never realized I'd be spending so much time raising funds, for example. Right. Or, I just didn't realize the competition from this nonprofit was going to be so intense, and I'm just not into that. And so that program can go away. The funds are reallocated to a similar program, and it's no harm, no foul. You haven't created something that has to be destroyed. But I always like to tell, a story of one of our programs, Mountain Bike Afghanistan, because it's really a great story about how a program can go from idea to nonprofit. So I remember having breakfast here in Bethlehem with this young Afghan man named Farid, and he had this idea. He wanted to use mountain biking to change people's view of Afghanistan. And also to bring joy and exhilaration in the outdoors to other young men and women in Afghanistan. So he started a mountain biking team in Afghanistan, but it incorporated here in the US. So he started out kind of under our umbrella. About a year later, he had developed his programming, and it was superb programming. So he incorporated as a nonprofit, but stayed under our umbrella. And I mean, they were just going really strong until, of course, the Taliban take over. And then their shift was, hey, we need to get our cyclists out of Afghanistan because the female cyclists are in danger. And the male cyclists have spoken up for gender equality, and they're in danger too now. And so I'm happy to say we've evacuated most of those cyclists now, provided them with bikes from our sponsor, Specialized. And I mean, he's just doing a great job, all from this idea that he had at breakfast, saying, do you think we can do this? That's cool. And I mean, people's lives have been changed forever because because of that relationship. And that just gives me a lot of satisfaction every day to think about programs like that.
That's really neat. And that's a great impact story.
Yeah.
For on so many levels. That's great. Well, now if so, how about employees? Not your, I mean, you have employees in the home office, right? But if, let's say, Mountain Bikes for Afghanistan wanted to hire somebody, how does that work? Do they become your employees? Do they become, what happens there?
Well, that's a good question. And so to fully understand that, we have to look at the two most popular ways to do fiscal sponsorship. The first most popular way is what we call Model A in the industry. And that's where we take the program into our own organization. The program, it's not a legal entity of its own. It's an idea with a mission that matches ours. We bring it under our organization, becomes part and parcel humanitarian social innovations. The second most common model is Model C. And Model C is a re-granting model where the program is a legal entity. All of ours are nonprofits, but it can be done with LLCs and so on. Sole props, that's a whole other thing.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And so with the re-granting, that organization has its own entity, its own bank account, its own board of directors. We receive tax exempt funds. We re-grant them to that Model C organization, and then we manage that grant to be sure that it's used for charitable purposes, right? And so that's the Model C. So for the Model A program that's completely under our umbrella, those employees are our employees. They're on our payroll, and we pay them with program funds, but we're managing that payroll.
So you also then handle all the HR stuff then too?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Correct.
That's huge.
And insurance, all of that, they are part and parcel our organization. For the Model C program, that's a re-granting model. If there are employees under that program, they're managed by that organization. They're not managed by us, right?
Right.
Now, sometimes in that situation, they maybe don't have the capacity to do that yet. So we contract out to them at a lower than market value cost to do that service for them because we're equipped for that.
Sure. Now, dare I ask, because it kind of begs the question, what's Model B?
People always ask. So Model B is a subcontracting model where we subcontract with a person or an entity to conduct the program. Okay,
so they're a 1099 employee.
Correct.
Of you. Well, not of us. I guess that's an oxymoron, but yeah, 1099 contractor with
they're 1099, right?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. That's fine. No, well, I had to ask.
Somebody had to ask, right? Somebody was going to ask if you didn't. So I'm glad you did.
Well, listen, like I said, anything else? I mean, this has really been educational.
No, I mean, I think there are good reasons to choose fiscal sponsorship. I mean, to me, it makes the most sense. To me, it's a smart choice, especially for a startup, but even as an option for a lot of different situations. And I'm always happy to chat with people about fiscal sponsorship. And like I said, even if we're not the best match for them, we're not super competitive in the sector. I mean, 9 chances out of 10, I know a fiscal sponsor that is a good match if we're not. We've received programs from other fiscal sponsors too. So it just kind of works that way. So I'm always open for a chat if anyone would ever have a question about fiscal sponsorship. But I think you'll find that a lot of fiscal sponsors are that way. So just reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out if you have questions to me or somebody else who's a fiscal sponsor, because we're here to help. We all want pretty much the same things. That's for a more healthy nonprofit sector. And we want the people who are supposed to be helped with the most possible dollars that can help them.
Well, if a short conversation in a cafe in Bethlehem can impact people halfway across the world, anything's possible. So
absolutely.
That's cool. So how would they get a hold of you? I know you're on LinkedIn yourself. I guess the organization would be, but how else? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way is by email. You can email office@humanitariansocialinnovations.com.
Okay.
It's a long email address, but it's just the name of the organization.
Okay, that's
Um,
good. And somebody
and
actually answers the office email, so that's a good
somebody
thing.
actually answers the office email. It's usually me, but that's okay because I like answering that email. It's always fun to meet people. So yeah, that's fine. And there's also a phone number on our website that you're welcome to call.
Okay, and the website is slightly different, right?
HSIFiscalsponsor.org.
Right, hsifiscalsponsor.org. Okay,
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Linda, thank you so much for being with us. I had as much fun as I thought I'd have. This is really cool.
Same. Thanks for having me, Matt. And I really hope this conversation can be helpful to a lot of people.
Well, thank you. We'll be talking. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye now.
Well, I hope you found this as good as I did. I'll tell you, I learned a lot about fiscal sponsorships and all the different nuances and ways it can help the nonprofit community. All right. Well, that about wraps it up. Thanks for being with us. I'm Matt Hugg with Nonprofit.Courses, and make it a great nonprofit day.